Colin, I was watching a video link, which is the has to do with the carbon mappers. Um, I found it
Yeah.
quite interesting, about sort of the long-standing propaganda that the energy sector has been kind of infiltrating our society with in terms of providing biased information and um, privately funded studies that are sort of in-house. I sort of knew that it was going on, but the approach was not only entertaining but just kind of informative. Jenny had sent me a link earlier on, so I subscribed to the channel because I just like the cut of the guy's jib. He's sort of like a young Ron Burgundy, but on the environmental front. And he makes some salient points when it comes to how these industries just sort of twist the narrative, state the realities. But
They're professionals at it. They have billions of dollars riding on it.
I don't know if you ever watched it. It was that movie called No Smoking, and it was about a tobacco lobbyist who basically said there's nothing to see here, and he would go around as very friendly. He'd hand out free cigarettes to people, and this is good for you. Most doctors actually prefer, like Virginia Slims and things like that. And
Yeah.
the correlation between what the lobbying that the tobacco industry had done and the sugar industry had done throughout history and still does, and the oil and gas industry as a whole continues to do. And almost it's like they never really change their objectives, they just change venues.
Yep.
They're like, oh, this has a stigma attached, so look over here. This is great. This is green. This is a new term. This is something you can accept. It's friendlier. Da 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 da. You know, but nevertheless, they're still practicing things the same way. Like or like in terms of the methane emissions, for instance, I found that really funny. Where it's just like, the EPA is just like, oh, we'll just ask the companies how much methane they're losing. They never did their own
Yeah.
investigations. They're just like, oh, we're not losing any. Okay, all right, good. And
Yeah.
just kind of
So he's referring to, Colin, just so you know, the new Climate Town video. It's called "Natural Gas is Scamming America," and it is an excellent, funny, quick. Have you watched it? Do you know what we're talking about?
No.
Okay, it's
okay.
just it's really clear, really succinct. Walks through the whole history in terms of the shale gas boom, or let's say the
Fracking boom.
horizontal fracking boom,
Yeah,
and the yeah. So we'll definitely have to have a conversation on it. I just think
mm-hmm.
it does a really good summary that is easy for anybody to understand. So yeah,
Yeah,
really good.
yeah,
Yeah, thanks for watching that, Alex. It's awesome.
yeah. I actually watched another one that he produced too, and it kind of goes into cleanup denial and how in children's books that are in elementary schools, and it's kind of a sad state, right? Like in the United States, for instance, schools are funded by their districts, and so poor districts can't really afford to fund schools adequately. So these oil companies will come in and they'll say, "Hey, we'll give your school like $78 million as long as you include these things in your curriculum." And they focus specifically on grades 1 through 4, like the most formidable years. And they have their own version of Bill Nye the Science Guy, and they have these cartoon children's books where it's like a bunch of rabbits and you know uh, prairie dogs discovered that the human beings are digging the ground up again and threatening their home. And then they have, the lobbyist animal with the hard hat who comes on. He says, like, don't worry, humans have learned their lessons this time. They're going to clean up their mess. It's all good. And then everyone's like, yay, humans are awesome. And that's the end of the book. it's just so blatant.
That's great. That'll have to
Yeah.
be. They'll definitely have to dive into that. Thank you so much, Colin.
Yeah.
Or
I send you the link to that one.
thank you. Yeah, I mean, if anything, we have to be able to listen to the realities of this stuff in a way that it's not so heart wrenching, right, Colin? We've talked
Yeah.
about that in the past. It's really hard to be real in this world right now. They do a good job of making it sort of light, like, hey, yeah, we're screwed if we don't do anything about this. Bang.
Yeah.
Okay, shall we get started? Um,
All right.
Alex, if you are ready, take it away.
Welcome to the Gravity Well, where we break down heavy ideas into small buckets anyone can handle. Our mission is simple: to set aside our differences and collaborate with others through conversation and process so we can face dilemmas to make our world a better place for all. A healthy living and relationship with our homeland and each other is our guide. In the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge we are in Treaty 7 territory and Métis District 15 lands. We take reconciliation action by seeking wisdom of elders, individuals, and communities, and share that knowledge and concern for clean water, air, land, life, and our resource needs.
The evolving mission statement, but the good news is it's getting closer. Well, I can hear a few hiccups in there, so we'll get it a little cleaner. But yeah, so Alex and I have been working hard to get the website finally like at a base level where we're ready to launch, an official launch. So really excited. We're close to that, and that's really what this message has been evolving as we go and as we talk to people and as we learn better and better what it is that we're doing, because of course this is a learning process for us too. So I'm just going to do some reflections and I'll let you both do the same. So we're back with our friend Colin Smith. So Colin and I, again, just for the audience, we met back in, I think, November last year. We were brought together through the Calgary Climate Hub in our both concerns with the health of the Eastern Slopes and the logging that was planned in the Highwood. So we had a win since our last meeting, which was that the Highwood logging did not go through. Of course, though, there is, it's sort of like a tube of toothpaste. Unfortunately, there were some other areas that were logged because the Highwood wasn't, which we learned about. So, a bit of a reason why we're taking another round at our efforts in terms of helping the Eastern Slopes. So we're going to dive into that today, what we're working on and what our concerns are and what that looks like. But I'm just going to reflect on the last couple weeks. So 2 weeks ago, we learned a lot about gravel mining and water, the interaction and the impacts. We have a ton of gratitude to the Big Hill Creek Preservation Society and the group that I've been talking to, the South McDougall Flats community. They've been sharing their stories and efforts in terms of trying to preserve water and make sure that gravel extraction is not going too far, especially in this time of drought. So it's a really important issue that they're helping us not only bring to light, but also get everyone else aware. And if they're seeing the same problems, realize that these are similar things that we need to address. So, and after that, we were joined with our friends from the Polluter Pay Federation. And we spoke about this model that we've put forward. So, it's this rock model that I just threw together in order to try and start thinking about what is the framework of our system in Alberta. And so we're using this round 2 of conversations to work through this model as we have conversations. So somewhere we're at, how we make decisions and how things move forward. But what I took away from the discussion with the Polluter Pay Federation is the who's who. Well, it's stakeholders, it's government, it's regulators, and it's institutions. What are the key relationships? Well, it's the ones that are aligned or in opposition with each other. What are the goals? It's both shared and competing objectives. Gaps, we talked a lot about beliefs being really key to being able to come together. People have very strong beliefs, for example, that like oil and gas is the heart of our problem, and that it's relationship building. Eventually we have to work together. That requires a ton of humility. And what are the alternatives to what we're doing? Think about being in collaboration and cooperation and communicating. And then we spoke with Mark McCormick, who's working with a philosophical group out of the University of Alberta. Well, they're hosting meetings, ever living meetings they're called, and the group is the New World Spirit. And so the point of the conversations is to break down concepts of universal truth. And so they're doing that by identifying its components. And those components are logic, spirit, and nature. And then using those, allowing the participants to consider those components and how they interact with one another, and in order to build wisdom. So people whose logical style is similar, they feel like they have a group that they can sort of work through issues together. So that's sort of the concept of the work they're doing. We're trying to unlock human potential. We're trying to come together as well with people. So we see a lot of, so we're actually pulling in some of the style, some of Mark's, the ever living meeting style into these meetings. So we're now trying to do just 4 rounds. So this is round 1. Round 2, we'll dive into our conversation. Round 3, we'll do some reflection with this model, and then we'll wrap up in round 4. So I've probably done enough talking. I'm just going to leave the the model itself here. So I'll just touch quickly on it, but just to say, we're looking at things like we've got governments on one side, plural, all levels, working in terms of like decision making. And then we have the actual laws of the land. So things that actually limit potentially what our governments want to do, or that there's things outside of our government's purview, like wildlife for the most part, and other things like that. So really trying to look at this in terms of what are the opposing things, the opposing forces, and how can we try and come together. That's the idea of this. So I'm going to stop there. I'm going to let Alex do some updates, and then perhaps Colin as well. Thanks.
Once again, I think Jenny gave an accurate synopsis of kind of where we're at. So we'll keep it short and sweet because we want to make sure that we get to what you have to contribute to, Colin. I just want to recap on some of the things that you were touching on in the last interview, specific to overshoot and how industry and society seems to be crossing thresholds and boundaries. And since the last time that we spoke, have you seen any progress, or have you seen further regression in terms of that?
Wow, that was short and sweet. And yeah, thanks for the reminder of our conversation last time. I went over the Stockholm Institute's planetary boundaries, which are nine different areas of the planetary system that, if we cross thresholds, it imperils the stability and the future of essentially modern civilization. I hate to say it, but yeah, I see very little progress from modernity as a whole on any of those thresholds. It seems like we're distracted by conflict and wars and consumerism on things like the planetary boundaries. Talking about those things, it's hard to have much hope for our collective willpower to deal with the big, challenging, complex questions. And I think that's maybe why it's challenging, is because it is so complex. These are wicked problems that are interlinked on, you can't just tease out one issue. Continue to see the carbon tunnel vision to be a lot of the conversation in solution spaces. And yeah, carbon, sequestering carbon or reducing our carbon footprint individually or collectively is just one piece of a very, very complex puzzle. But there's still, still reasons to be hopeful. There's still, beautiful days, and the robins just returned to Calgary, so some things are right in the world. But unfortunately, don't see much progress on the planetary boundary, addressing our planetary boundary front. You mentioned in our kind of pre-conversation about methane and how the solution was to get companies to self-report their methane emissions, and it made me think of the term apocalypse, or I think the root word is the Greek word apocalypsis, which I think in most people's modern minds thinks like you think fire and brimstone or the end of the world, but I've been told that word actually means lifting of the veil, and that made me think about
Correct.
the methane satellite, Google's methane um, special satellite that essentially can image methane emissions from space. Companies have been uh, originally tasked with self-reporting their methane emissions. Now the veil is being lifted thanks to new technology. Solutions and tipping points can also come from unexpected places in a positive way as well. There's lots of interesting ways that solutions and awareness and action can come from. So we live in interesting times, and it's only going to get more interesting.
Ain't that the truth? The reality is the most interesting thing, to any better than the real thing. This conversation to be a really good launch of what we're doing about our frustrations. Because thank you for asking that great question about the boundaries. We're still moving in the wrong direction. We're still moving forward with development. We had this win, as I said. We had this logging program get paused, and it is a relief. Please hear, I'm very grateful. But it made me realize that to call for it to stop isn't enough. We've been attending all of these watershed meetings, council meetings, and things, and coming up with what was an underlying concern of mine, which is it does not feel like the public is being adequately represented in any of the decision making. And so that's one of the problems. So I'll say, having equal representation of the public. And when I say the public, I mean First Nations, Métis, Albertans, landowners, you name it. Whoever is there facing this issue, they need to be represented. Yes, we need to have the regulator in that discussion. We need to have industry in that discussion to some degree. And then we do need all levels of government to be responsible to the public in all decision making. This is public collaboration. So that's one of the aspects. So this is one of 5 things that I'm seeing in this problem. It's not just about logging; it's also about coal mining, right? We have way too much development in our headwaters, and one of a bunch of the work we've been doing is to look to the expert Kevin Van Teegen, who is a ecologist, right, by background, and he had worked at the head of the Banff National Park for decades. This is an extremely knowledgeable man and very passionate about history. So he said back in 1870s, we knew full well that developing in the headwaters was a terrible thing to do. In other words, our headwaters are so small and serve such a large area that the risk to any population downstream, if we were to get after that area in terms of development, was a risk to everyone between here and ultimately the Mississippi River or the Hudson's Bay from anywhere that goes north from Southern Alberta. So we have this small stretch. I'm going to let Colin explain. You can get into that, Colin, the size of it and everything. There's an investment in safety risk that's not being appreciated by the size of this water crisis. So please hear, this isn't just an Eastern Slopes problem. This is all a drought issue, widespread water shortages, and now risks to other things like contamination based on water shortages. So there is not only investment risk in terms of both agriculture and resource extraction. Both industry uses what came out from the CBC this week. Just over 50% of our groundwater is historically. Now hear that. That's historically. We're moving forward with less access right now, so that's a large number to be handing over to industry. And with that, agriculture as well is at risk when we're giving that water to industry and not agriculture. That's a big in my view, a waste of that precious resource. Because please hear, once we give water to industry, it's not coming back. It's actually being removed from the system, either through, a tailings pond contamination, or it's being injected by way of fracking. When rivers go dry, we have critical species that do not prevail, and those species feed the food chain. This is what Colin was talking about in our last discussion, how everything's interconnected. And when we lose keystone species like trout, it can mean ecological devastation. Instead of, still plucking away in various areas, we need to stop for logging unless it is to thin out spaces to make sure that we're saving, homes and stuff from forest fires. We don't want a fire risk because there is certain forests that do need thinning out. So there is value for some level of logging, but certainly no coal mining. We need roads to be removed. We need sites to be restored from both oil and gas and coal mining. This is risking and potentially irreversible loss of our source water. So I think people need to understand that this isn't just critical for Alberta, but this is critical, like I said, for everyone downstream of us, that we start restoring our headwaters and making sure that we actually have storage capacity to keep our water where it needs to be. So I'm going to stop there. I would love both of your thoughts. I don't know who wants to start off next, but yeah, go for it.
Tapping the underground wells is increasingly becoming my concern, because when you tap these wells and some of these wells that they'll take like 10,000 years to replenish, and that's if the land above isn't actually disturbed. Um, So when you tap these wells, you're lowering the water table, and then even no matter how much rain you get, it won't sink to replenish that water table. Won't go through its natural filtration process, so you end up with aridification. In addition to that, like when I was at the cabin meeting, I posed a question to them. Um,
Oh, can you expand on that a bit again, Alex? Can you remind us what cabin is and what you were doing?
it's a co-op of people who geologists and geophysicists and geoscientists and geotechnical engineers, analysts, ecologists, biologists who assemble their data into multiple accessible real-time databases that you can contribute to if you go to these sites and do your own samples. Um, but they were talking about low flow for the past 5 years and how it's actually affecting the flora and the fauna in these watersheds and these river valleys. And I had done an independent study that was based on actually something that David Suzuki had done over a decade ago on blue-green algae. And blue-green algae typically forms in low flow or stagnant warm water. Now, initially, it's good for the fish population, but eventually it removes all the oxygen from the water and starves the fish. My question was basically as a result of these blue-green algae formulations, are they going to produce microcysteines as a result? And microcysteines are a natural hepatotoxin, a brain toxin. And if that land completely dries out, those toxins can become airborne. And according to the GSC, they have been responsible for the past 5 major land-based extinctions. So it's a cause for major concern. And unfortunately, at the cabin meeting, none of these people were able to pinpoint any answer, though they did attempt to brainstorm on the coffee break a little bit. But this is a concern, not only as a risk of mass extinction of the fauna due to microcysteines and airborne hepatotoxins as a result of aridification. So, yeah, that was some of the stuff that I picked up at the cabin meeting, and it's quite a serious issue. We need to keep that water moving and make sure that it's protected. So yeah, that's my little contribution to that.
What Alex is talking about with that sort of makes me think about this problem a little differently, like you were touching on, Colin. This is such a complex thing, right? It kind of grows arms and legs every time you think about it. But this piece, though, about evaporation, and we haven't really talked about air contamination in terms of, like he's saying, as we dry up, these potential toxins are also airborne, and we're not even, are we measuring that? Are we looking for it? Are we understanding that risk? So I think it's just another leg that I didn't really think about. And I think that's the limitation when we focus on in the compartmentalization effort that we tend to do in our world. We're not thinking about these things holistically. Anyway, so Colin, can you expand on our kind of 5 concerns, or if you would word them differently or anything, yeah, around how you see this problem and our effort as well?
Where to start on this broad and complex issue? I just see overall the activities that were in the land use decisions that are enabled by current legislation and industry are essentially slowly killing our the ecology that life in this part of the planet relies on. And this is not an isolated issue. This is happening in every corner of the world to varying scales. It's like we can't help ourselves collectively, and there's no reciprocity. And something that I just wrote down that you were talking about public engagement and public representation. I think part of the challenge and the self-reinforcing system that capitalism is that we don't people that are even concerned don't even have the time or the energy to be involved in these public consultation or voicing their concerns because most people are busy working a job and doing all the things in their nuclear families that where it's very hard to get involved in these things without being one extremely passionate or two having or both having more free time. So there's many challenges, but I want to get back to that reciprocity, that term reciprocity. For the last 100, well, you could even say like 300 years, I've been thinking a lot about beavers lately, and this country, this entire land, Rupert's land. was essentially a beaver farm. That's all that the colonial power of Britain saw this entire country of Canada, pre so-called Canada, pre-Canada, as essentially a source of beaver pelts for making freaking hats. That's the history that our culture is rooted to. It's actually ridiculous. But before
Unreal.
settlers and Western civilization arrived here, we were already extracting a keystone species from this land. And when Palliser did his exhibition across Canada and came into Southern Alberta, called this place desolate and no good for farming. That was shown in tree ring data that was a period of extreme drought. They're like looking at Douglas fir tree rings in southern Alberta. These trees live 400 or 500 years old, so they essentially in their tree rings have climatic data that show that prolonged droughts are a regular occurrence here without climate change. These patterns that we're experiencing are a part of the natural weather and climatic cycles here, but we are putting further pressure on our watersheds through forestry and land use practices. And when Palliser arrived, or before settlers even arrived, there was already a lack of beaver, who essentially are a key part of storing and just overall watershed health, because they build dams that essentially force the water, instead of running off down the river and to the Hudson's Bay, force that water to stay held and seep into the groundwater. And the wells that you're talking about, Alex, many of them, the groundwater is there because of slow infiltration of water through geographic features on the land. And as you say 10,000 years to recharge these aquifers or these wells. You can look at most resources that we deal with, be it oil and gas or forests. We are spending our savings account rapidly, and we will have nothing to back it up. Something that was said I went to the Dried Up documentary, which is a film, short 30-minute film about the state of the drought in southern Alberta, made by Kevin Van Tighem and a few others. The best long-term investment we can make is in the water security of the eastern slopes and southern Alberta. And then I've been reflecting on these terms. If we have no water, we have no beer. If we have no beef, we have no oil. We have no economy and no life. Like if we damage our water sources and yeah, Jenny, you asked me to talk about this 10-kilometer strip that is essentially the source of 95% of all of the water in southern Alberta. And areas like Banff and Kananaskis, there's no resource extraction, and those forests are intact, almost too intact. The other areas are over disturbed. Forestry, there's oil and gas, there's roads, there's cattle, and all these things drastically affect the ecological services that watersheds to store and filter water that for our major cities, for agriculture, for oil and gas extraction, for making beer. With climate change, with land use decisions, we are on a trajectory to have a lot less water. I don't think your average Albertan is feeling it, but definitely farmers, ranchers, municipal decision makers, oil and gas industry, all these kind of people that require water to make their job and their responsibilities work are definitely worried. We were originally calling for a moratorium and policy, but we are now advocating for restoration of headwaters and ecosystem services in the headwaters. All this stuff I've said is a lot of doom and gloom, but I think the key part to shift the tide is inspiring people with a vision of a brighter future and how they can get involved. There's a lot of work to be done, like actual hands-on work, but also organizing and changing our mindsets and speaking with our friends and family about the situation, but also giving them providing opportunities. So something that I've been inspired by over the movement of ecosystem restoration camps all over the world, where essentially you go to areas that need to be restored and you create a temporary temporary restoration camp with the intention of restoring watershed and ecosystem health and function. Tens to hundreds of people there that are fed and stay there and are there for a whole season doing heavy lifting, building community, enjoying their time. And yeah, that's something that I'm hoping we can do in Southern Alberta's Headwater.
Have you seen the Green Wall project in Africa?
Yeah, I have. And
They
I would.
built this forest from coast to coast right across Africa, and they literally stopped the expansion of the Sahara Desert. It's incredible. Like
Yeah,
when people just get the shovels in the ground and they come together and they do this, it's actually not beyond hope at all. It requires a bit of a
yeah.
shift in thinking.
And it makes me think of another presentation I recently watched, which was essentially about restoring large scale ecosystem restoration, being able to essentially change weather patterns. Um, this Sahara and the Sinai Peninsula and the Amazon rainforest are all at different stages of degradation, but the Sinai Peninsula in Egypt used to be a rainforest and used to the interaction of transpiration of the forest. The Amazon is called the lungs of the earth, but it's now approaching or has crossed the tipping point from being a carbon sink to being a carbon source because of it being cut down and burned so we can graze more cattle. But that's essentially what happened thousands of years ago in the Sinai Peninsula. There's like nine historic rivers that flow through there, but because of population expansion and the increase in or like the invention and implementation of agriculture and grazing, those trees were slowly cut down. The people that were doing it probably had no idea that the long term effects of that. It was just like natural human survival. But that now is like a dead desert with dead rivers, and the wind blows essentially a different direction because of it being a desert and not a rainforest. Um, and you can apply that to British Columbia and Alberta weather patterns. Pacific moisture comes across BC, and I'm not a scientist, but I can see how, because of the land degradation made across BC by forestry and other, land use decisions, there's a lot more exposed dry air and not essentially a green forest the entire way. And green forests provide uh, evapotranspiration, fungal spores, pollen, all of those things are nuclei for rain. If those systems have been disrupted over the last 100 years, there could be a connection to why Alberta sees less rainfall and is in more prolonged droughts. But again, you can't simplify these things. These are complex dynamic systems, but you can, with just looking at the choices that we're making on our land, tell that we are degrading it for sure. And that's, yeah, we need to play a role in reciprocity and giving back to the land and stewarding the land with positive actions that can be a source of inspiration to generations of young people that are faced with a pretty dire future.
Okay, so I want to reflect a couple things back there for you. Sorry, I'm just gonna mute. So I love that you brought up land use. Thank you for reflecting on that. So one of the key things that we can lean on in terms of policy is that we have two legal documents that have been approved through cabinet back in 2022, which call for sites on timeline. So essentially, what the concept is it looks at species at risk, as Alex was alluding to this methane story. Well, the whole reason why we're only talking about emissions is so that we can step over this massive land use problem, this extraction that's happened over many decades that's just been adding on to the landscape and taking away from it. And we have not restored, we have not given back, we have not had this reciprocity that's necessary to have balance in an ecosystem. So now we need to be aiming for that. So I think that's one of the things I've talked about is leaning on that. But I think something you said here that is really important about inspiring Colin and an opportunity. So I was in a meeting too, another group that I'm working with, which will hopefully swing into these conversations, is Markham Hislop has energy circle that he's started. And we're talking about the renewable or having a Western intertie grid, like, across all the Western provinces. What would a great grid look like, renewable, sourced, and clean? And what comes with that is a bunch of inspiration. He talked about some of the renewable companies are actually looking at moving sites through closure because they want to reuse these spots and reduce the harm on the landscape. So there's an opportunity, from what I just heard you say, for us to, like you said, inspire this ecology.
Ecosystem restoration camps.
So what I was thinking around that is for us to inspire, like trying to just get that going. Maybe we go to the Orphan Well Association and say, hey, we're going to do this work, help fund it. You know what I mean? There's lots of creative ways if we can show the path to jobs, and good jobs. Like, that's the one thing I keep saying to my industry friends whenever I get a chance lately is I would be back in the industry in a heartbeat if it was centered on restoring the ecology, right? What a feel good industry to be a part of. What an amazing thing to be to contribute to. So I think that's we've got a lot of doom and gloom, as Colin said, and we're trying to now look to inspire. So I'm just going to quickly offer what we're doing next. So first of all, we're hosting a little gathering in Calgary on April 20th. The Gravity Well is sponsoring it, and as the Calgary Climate Hub. And so we're gathering people to talk about these concerns we have and how we're trying to inform the public. As Colin said, everybody is head down in our busy modernity world, so that there's no time to understand this stuff. But instead, we're going to go to where people go. Through basically May and June, we're going to go to the places where people hike, where the places where people fish, where they canoe, where they want to be in nature and they're surprised to see the state of it. And we're going to meet them there with understanding and some opportunities to get involved and feel good about moving us in the right direction. So I'm excited about all of that. Colin, do you have any comments with respect to our plans and how to get people involved, engaged, anything like that?
Yeah, I think there's lots of ways. I spent most of the day reflecting on changes or our new approach after the pause of the Highwood and our clarity of how we now need to ask for restoration. So yeah, the work, like you said, the work that we're doing, we're going. Yeah, maybe I'll just read some of the objectives that I drafted this morning. So like going to the trailheads and to the places where we're meeting people that enjoy these spaces is all about raising awareness about the history and the current state and the future potential of Southern Alberta's headwaters, uh, and kind of feeding into the next objective of why we want to raise that awareness is because we want to increase public pressure on the current provincial government and opposition for changes to the Water Act and Forest Act and land use operating ground rules in the Southern Alberta headwaters. And then, yeah, these are some of the new kind of objectives. They're very similar to what we've talked about in the past, but yeah, organizing a diverse coalition for action, advocacy, and inspiration regarding protection and restoration of other Southern Alberta's headwaters. And then, yeah, so this next one is just a kind of a play on words. So we currently, every watershed in Southern Alberta or even across Alberta has WPACs, which stands for as WPAC, Watershed Participation and Advisory Councils. And that's like Bow River Basin Council and Old Man Watershed Council. And these organizations are funded by industry and are essentially have their hands tied. They're allowed to do studies and advocate, but they're not really allowed to advocate or stick their neck out there, and it's quite frustrating that they have diverse boards and can do things, but they're not actually doing anything. I shouldn't say that. They are doing meaningful work, but they're not. We could go so much further, and so I came up
They're
with,
not changing the scope.
yeah,
That's what I want to highlight is they are not operating under, they're not able to say, hey, we should not be modeling as if water in equals water out in the system. We need to look at the fact that there is evapotranspiration happening, which means we are losing more water to the atmosphere than what is being deposited in rain or snow. And we need to acknowledge that in terms of risk, immediate risk. And the other thing is that when you build something, so they're focused on building reservoirs, building dams. Well, in an open area, that gives more opportunity for evapotranspiration. And we're seeing that in two of the dams. We have the St. Mary and the Old Man are at all-time lows, and it's really low, like 15% in the St. Mary reservoir. These watershed groups are not powerful, able enough to back up and say, nope, that's not what we should be doing. So that's the key thing.
Are these people under the impression that water that evaporates from a certain geophysical location is automatically going to come back down in that same geophysical location? Is that where they're missing the message here? Or are they at risk of losing their funding from their sponsoring organizations if they do speak to these truths truthfully, responsibly, ethically, the way that they were supposedly designed to do?
Well, to your first question, I don't think they plan or like are anticipating the water is going to just return. Kevin Van Tighem said last night is so the Old Man Reservoir was built in 1989, I believe, and the first water license, or so that dam is owned and operated by the Alberta government. And the first water license for that dam was given to the Alberta government for the evaporation of two Olympic-sized swimming pools, like on a pretty regular basis. I think it might be annually, but it could be when you have just a river that's flowing naturally and doesn't go into a big man-made lake or reservoir, essentially, it doesn't evaporate as much as it does when you have a large surface area of reservoir. In the big scheme of things, that's a minor loss of water, but kind of speaks to our current thinking of not thinking about the source of this water, just thinking about capturing that water and storing it so we can easily do with it what we want. Your second question, these watershed participation advisory councils are quasi government entities. They have no real authority, but they are created and funded uh, with some provincial government money, but then they also have partnership and board members that are industry representatives. They're muddy organizations. There's well-intentioned people there, but they really like. I'm on the legislation and policy committee recently, new member of the Bow River Basin Council legislation and policy committee. They don't want to do any. All they're going to do is write one letter that outlines their perspective nicely and not to piss anybody off, and they're going to send it to the government ministry, and that's the extent of their work out of like an 8-hour workshop that 100 people attended and gave passionate to help support watershed health, support the fish, speak for the environment. All like they channel this and they take all that energy. They hosted this workshop, gave everybody lunch. All these smart people gave presentations, and then they are going to write one letter that likely will get read by government, but not, as my opinion, is not going to change anything. And there's so much work to be done that's actually on the ground. And so back to the objectives of our Headwaters advocacy, this new one that I wrote today is organize local watershed restoration action committee. These would be W racks instead of W packs, and not just advisory councils. They're actions based around essentially doing those ecosystem restoration camps
So they're
to
boots,
undertake
not suits.
Exactly. Undertake ecosystem restoration activities in Southern Alberta headwaters. Some of the WPACs are doing good work. I don't want to like paint them all with the same brush, but Old Man Watershed Council has been extremely frustrating of not willing to even support or essentially brushing us off like we're, you know, dumb people from the city. Uh, where like they're doing some good things. They host good events that get people together and they build beaver dam analogs and do like they're doing some things, but it's like, can't you see the train headed off the cliff that we're on right now? And they essentially have their jobs that are funded and they don't want to lose their jobs by sticking their neck out. That's essentially how I see it.
Yeah. Well, and I'll
But
just add, just from, somebody who has been in the industry trapped directly, The challenge is it's hard to gain perspective, right? Because you're in this for so long. Like they've been doing this game for years, decades, right? So it's really hard to appreciate that the pace has changed underneath their feet, and the sense of business as usual is not something that's limited to the oil and gas industry. And that's what, was really been eye-opening for me is that business as usual is a problem. You talked about it early on in this consumerism, right? But this concept of, oh yeah, we host meetings and we tell things and then we do it again next quarter, right? We need action groups. Yes, we got to change. That's the thing I keep saying is we're no longer wondering, we don't know, we know what the problem is. We've gone through the 5 W's of the issue, right? We know it's ecological stability and social stability, right? We know all of the pieces. It's now into the how. How are we acting moving forward, right? So I love that you're talking about action. That's fantastic.
I think I'd like to circle back to the beginning of the conversation when you were speaking about there's a lot of doom and gloom out there, but you're moving more towards the inspiration side. It's amazing what can be accomplished. I don't know if you got the link that I put into the chats there on Clubhouse, but it's the Great Green Wall. It's a Nat Geo documentary, but it's also a project that was initiated through worldwide organizations. And there are a lot of stories like this happening all across the planet. Our generation has raised a group of children, basically telling them that the world's going to end in 12 years. There's nothing we can do about it. They're going to go without. There's no hope. There's no reason for them to exist. It's all been destroyed preemptively, and they're going to be left with nothing. And then we wonder why these kids are rebelling and yelling and screaming and saying like you took and going insane. If you raise a whole generation of people with absolutely no hope and no sense of purpose, right, and no direction, what do you think is going to happen? So what's really important is to bring that hope back to this generation and to galvanize them with a sense of purpose. It doesn't cause harm, doesn't destroy property, but it actually gives back to the community and it gives back to the world and to the environment. And I think that is a task that can be done. And there are enough of them that would, if they were given the opportunity, would put those shovels in the ground and help make some progress there in real tactile ways instead of just being an influencer on YouTube.
I fully agree. I think there's a lot of intersectionality to giving people opportunities to restore ecosystems. And it could address the housing crisis. It can address poverty. It can address essentially the trajectory we're on. It heals the ecosystems that we rely on. It could be a gateway where universal basic income kind of can be provided to these people working on landscape restoration.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and the politicians should love that because they can say, look at how many jobs I created. Look at how amazing I am. These jobs are crucial, and there are more than enough of them. Because even though with technology we have the entire planet at the push of a button, and these projects are huge, you know what I
yeah.
mean? And there's a real opportunity to create jobs and tasks for everyone if we can just inspire people to see that fundamental truth.
It's very much a Green New Deal. But yeah, I want to highlight one of the links I put in the chat. It's to Common Land, which is an organization that I've been following for a while, an online kind of deep dive course with them. And they have this four returns model. And so it's all about investing in landscape restoration. And so the process, I'll just walk through it really quickly. It has 5 elements. For the first element to the process is establishing landscape partnerships. They advocate for industry needs to be involved. They have the money to do it is the main part, but they also might have some expertise, and their business model relies on the ecosystem services. So they have a reason to be investing back into landscape restoration. They advocate for public-private partnerships, so that would be government, be it municipal or provincial or federal, and then industry or private business, and then nonprofit. So it's like a public-private three-way triangle partnership, and the nonprofit essentially does the implementation on the ground, be it an ecosystem restoration camp or something like that. So it involves in building a landscape plan, implementing the plan, and then monitoring and learning. And then they say that this leads to 4 types of returns. One being a financial return, like long-term value in the ecosystem, natural returns, so the prosperity of the landscape, social return being creating jobs social prosperity and networks. And then finally, the return of inspiration, opening people's eyes to the possibility of a better future. And that's where I've been inspired about inspiration. They do this work, so an economic zone, so essentially that would be like in and around Calgary or around the city centers in Southern Alberta, a combined zone where it's just maybe more like the rural farmland where you're, creating food and fiber, but you're also integrating, biodiversity and landscape functions of water and in the combined zone, and then the natural zone, which would be the headwaters or the protected areas where there's not a lot of people living or no people living, but it's the ones that are very key to providing our landscape services. And then they advocate for this 20 years model. You need a minimum of 20 years or one generation to successfully implement large scale landscape generation. And to me, this whole model is very inspiring, and I want to do more to bring it to say these watershed restoration action committees, or kind of go on a tour to share this knowledge or this
Amazing.
model, because they've implemented it successfully on over 100 projects over all over the world, be it China or Spain or Africa.
Can you speak a little bit
So yeah,
about the course that you took? Like, is that something that they do ongoing?
a free online course through Coursera. They have two. One is a business case for landscape restoration, and the other is basics of landscape restoration. But if you go to Common Land and I think it's under resources or learn, it'll lead you to Coursera, and you can sign up and take this course for free on your own pace. So I highly recommend it.
Awesome. So I think that's something we should add to our information. So we're going to provide anybody who volunteers with us. So Colin, just so you know, I'm thinking we'll share this video with our volunteers so that they can know what we're thinking in terms of their
Yeah, please.
advocacy. But yeah, so in that, I think we should include, so we're going to have a card with a QR code, and it'll have, like Colin said, a request of government, but also, we want to be able to reach other people in that, perhaps the media or some other branches when we send it out. But we're going to have backup data. So we'll refer to some Lauren Finch stuff, some Kevin Van Teegen stuff, as we've mentioned. There's a study that just was completed on forest harvesting, which, that is a documented explanation of how deforestation is hurting our eastern slopes. There's some scientific evidence that came to light on that, as well as on coal mining. So we'll include all those kind of juicy knowledge bits, but also inspiration bits. I think it would be awesome to have, hey, if you want to learn, go this way. If you want to get involved, come this way. If you want to do, if you want to be on an action committee, I love this. And actually, the South Madougall Flats wants to do a society, and maybe I should say it should be an action committee. So that's a perfect start. We can start right there. Use one in action. Amazing. Okay, so anything before we wrap on sort of this general activity? Cool beans. Okay, so I see we're close to the hour. I don't want to keep everybody, but I do want to sort of reflect back on this model and just think about, what we talked about today. And we could use this as our closing thoughts, if that's okay. But I'm just looking at that model, which is the rock model, and it shows this concept of, like I said, with these opposing forces on either side of the aisle. I've used Mark's three concepts of trust at the top here. We need to honor everybody's spirit in terms of how they, see and perceive the world. We need to honor that balance in nature. And with that comes, kind of a universal logic and trust. So that's kind of, how this is taking shape for me. It's not just about the opposing forces that I put in the bottom there, but, we talked about governments and law, laws of the land earlier, but we've got authority, but on the other side of that coin, we've got approval. So as Colin's saying, we need to gain more disapproval so that the authorities understand the issues that we're seeing. We have regulations, but we also have limits, so these regulations which are failing us, as you've described, Colin, we have this sort of setup for just extracting type behavior. Well, we've got limits that are forcing us to look at those regulations, and so we can be ready with some recommendations, right? We've got corporations on one side, and actually corporations are supposed to have a level of governance. So that's a new one for me in this model. I put that on and I thought, interesting. There's sort of governance on two sides of this equation when I think of it in my mind, but I'm open to other thoughts. And then a couple other things I have on here is there's obligations, but there's also rights, right? So we have obligations to industry or like investors, things like that. But there's also, people have human rights, and so, when we talk about resource extraction, as Kevin Van Tighem highlighted, we can't have oil and gas without water, so we have to have a balance there to make sure we're restoring that kind of thing. And then last kind of thing I put in here was schools versus stories. So we have these schools of thoughts, is what I was thinking, is people sort of lean into this. It's a school of thought rather than an evolving story, a story that's unwritten but can still change. So anyway, those are some of the concepts that I put in here in terms of like how do we construct the forces that are in at play here. This is just a thought process. As Alex was saying earlier today, we're a think tank, man. So what do you guys think? Any final thoughts on this before we wrap up?
Yeah, I think history's proven that anytime there's an unregulated marriage between corporations and governance, we end up with something looking like Mussolini. And that's never good for the people. Then again, history's also proven if we have centralized government that's supposed to be for all the people, it's basically the exact same thing. It's like communism versus fascism. It's kind of like Coke versus Pepsi. It's all bad for you. Um, so we need something else. And I think inspiration is kind of the name of the game. We need to give each other a dream again. And one of the issues I found when I go to these council meetings is no disrespect to the experts in their fields, but they're using terminology and dry, boring presentations that are highly detailed if you know what they're talking about. But if you're just a civilian who's trying to understand what the challenges are, it's going to be extremely difficult to understand that. So what I'm kind of trying to figure out how to do is maybe find a way to translate those complex things into a simpler form so that people can still stay informed and feel like they're doing their part without having to go get a PhD in geotechnical engineering. You know what I mean? Because everyone can pick up a shovel if they feel like they're doing it for the right reason. You know, and that's kind of my takeaway from this, and that's the direction that I'm choosing to go forward with. Like I'm actually I went to this big seed bank and I gathered a whole bunch of seeds and I'm actually landscaping my whole property with indigenous plants and growing food, and I'm going to photo document and video document the whole process to show that by grading the land and allowing the water to work for it, um, I can actually prevent lots of wastewater from going into the storm drain, but I can also grow indigenous plants, contribute to the water table, use less water, capture more water, and grow food on a very small little parcel that I have. And maybe that can be a way that I can inspire other people to do the same, and they can ditch their lawns that just suck up the water and don't do anything good for the water table. And I think if I can show other people that they can do the same thing, minimal effort, minimal cost, um, but that can be something of inspiration for them to make a difference too. So with that, I'll just kind of I'll leave it at inspiration. I'm inspired, and I like that you're inspired if you use it effectively in the right direction. So thanks for having this conversation and trusting us with your time, sir.
Thanks for having me. The doom and gloom is only part of the equation. We all have our own personal, unique gifts that, what's the saying? Our passions are linked to a thirst in the world. And so if we can find those things that, light a fire in us, there's part of the world that needs them. And, there's a lot of problems that need solving. One of the few that I have is I'm very passionate about composting. And over the last couple of years, that's led me to host a weekly meetup in the summertime at Highfield Farm called Compost Club. That's been very inspirational.
What time? When is it, Colin? Like, how can people join if they
It
want?
starts in May, the first week in May on Tuesdays. It'll be every Tuesday for the summer from 5 to at Highfield Regenerative Farm. It's just a casual meetup where you can come and essentially pick up a shovel or we make compost. We make a compost pile a week, and there's a diverse community of like-minded people that show up, and it's all about soil health, making compost to improve gardens and soil, and it's a mini microcosm of what I want to see these ecosystem restoration camps or watershed restoration action groups be. That's where I've seen the positive connections and mental health benefits, not just for myself, but other people that come to these groups where you can essentially get your hands dirty, get those microbes that make you feel good and feel like you're doing something positive. So the inspiration is such a key part of it as an antidote or an answer to the doom and gloom. People want to feel like they're able to do something. Tapping away on your computer or playing video games doesn't feed it the same way as hanging out with other people and getting your hands dirty in the dirt.
That's so true. We will definitely visit and maybe do a little video with you too, Colin, so that we can
We'd
help
love it.
people
My
see how
wife
much
is
impact.
super into gardening. We'll be there, and my neighbor Lori, she's super into gardening, so she'll be there. We'll start
Yeah,
recruiting people to to come on
great.
out.
We make hot composting pile. Compost Club is the hottest club in town, and
I love
yeah,
it.
it is growing. It's drawing a lot of people in. Lots to learn there, like from the patterns of community gathering around that want to apply on to new spaces as well. So thanks for having me tonight.
Let's wrap it there. Really appreciate you always, Colin. I'm so glad that I've had the opportunity to work with you and now Alex too. This is just we're getting stronger together, and it's there's momentum definitely. Our understanding of what this looks like for us is getting clearer and clearer. So lots more to talk about this year.
Thank
All
you.
right,
Okay,
have a great night.
bye.